Welcome everybody to my session about Microsoft DevBox and Azure deployment environments. Before we dig into the content, let's first start off by saying a huge thank you to the sponsors for making this event possible. So do go and check out their booths, talk with them, ask questions, get familiar with what they can offer. I work as a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and I'm also a core maintainer on the Arc Jumpstart team. So working also a lot with infrastructure as code, PowerShell, of course, since I'm presenting here, but also all of the surrounding ecosystem, like setting up a development environment for PowerShell, right? So the topic for today is to have a look into the past. What did we have available 30 years ago, right, as a developer? That has changed pretty dramatically when it comes to how does the development environment looks like, what are the prerequisites that we need, and so forth. So if we fast forward to today, we can see that the ecosystem here has grown to become a lot bigger. We have a lot of open source tooling available, basically a lot of more programming languages, and a lot more dependencies to handle. So a few years ago, Microsoft started to do some research on this area. So interviewing a lot of customers and asking how long does it take for the developers in your company to get onboarded to a new code base, basically, or a new project. So depending on the industry, the answer is of course different, because there are different requirements, compliance requirements, security requirements, and so forth. But here you can get an indication of the different industries. And regardless what industry a customer fits into, there are a lot of steps to go through, right, in order to get the developer actually starting being productive, creating code, and from the moment you get your physical corporate laptop into the moment you can create your first pull request, right? There is a lot of friction there, and a lot of the steps that you see here is things that can take a lot of time, right? Because things have to be approved, have to be ordered, find the correct documentation, and all of the elements that you can see here. And we also have VDI solutions, right? But they doesn't kind of fill the need from a developer perspective, right? Because these environments are typically meant for office workers that needs, for example, Word, Outlook, Teams, that kind of standard applications. Typically don't have local administrative permissions on those systems, right? And they are not really meant for development work, especially when it comes to security concerns and so forth. As a developer, we need to do things that is not ready for production yet, right? Because it's being developed. So with all of these things in mind, Microsoft announced in 2023, I believe it was in July of that year, Microsoft DevBox became generally available. So this is a product or a service running in the Azure infrastructure to make self-service capabilities available to developers. And least but not least is the ability to define how should the environment look like as code, right? So if you have worked with the GitHub code spaces before, VS Code dev containers, you've probably been to some of the sessions here before today about that. And there you had a Docker file, right, where you can specify what tools to install. You could do a lot of steps to install the exact prerequisite for the specific project in mind. So it's kind of the same thought here, that you can define all of the prerequisites, all of the requirements for the project as code. So let's dive in and have a look how does this look like in practice. So we'll get one level of inception here, because I'm going to actually do all of the demos on a DevBox. So when you have set up a DevBox, if you are on Windows 11, you actually have the ability to add the DevBox to the taskbar. So when you click on the taskbar view, you can see on the right-hand side, I have a DevBox there called Arc Jumpstart Dev. So instead of clicking on this one, I can simply just click Control Windows and the key arrows left or right to navigate between my local system and the remote DevBox. So now I'm into the remote desktop, making it a pretty seamless experience, right, to go back and forth. Also, first of all, wanted to showcase the outline of the presentation. So we'll start with looking a bit about the DevBox basics, right? How does this look like from an end user perspective, the developer? That could be ourselves, right, as kind of PowerShell developers. So we're going to go through how that looks like. Then we're going to have a look at PowerShell desired state configuration, which is kind of the building blocks for the customizations we can do. Winget configuration, which is package management and kind of the orchestrator for applying these configurations, and also look into kind of the Azure side of things, how to set up the DevBox team customizations and manage this at scale in an enterprise environment. So let's first of all start out with the basics from the end user perspective, right? So the first time you are onboarding, imagine that you're a developer, you need to create a DevBox for yourself, right? Then we have this devportal.microsoft.com, the portal where you can do the initial deployment of a DevBox. So the first time you log on here, this will be, of course, empty. So when you go ahead and click New DevBox, then you will get a list of projects that you have access to. In my case, I have created a couple of projects. We can see that we have the PSConfEU dev project that we're going to use for this demonstration. So let's just go ahead and select that. And we also have to give the DevBox a name, right? So just call it PSConfEU dash demo, for example. This is a name that you can decide. It will show up in your list of DevBoxes. Here you can choose if you want to kind of have one main DevBox that you use for all of your development, or if you work on multiple projects which have multiple prerequisites with the configuration as code defined for each project, then you can of course name them differently. After selecting the project, you can have access to one or more DevBox pools. So this basically defines how are the hardware for the virtual machine, how much memory, CPU, and storage is available. So this is something that the team lead or the project team lead can decide, right? What SKUs do we need? For example, one for front-end development and so forth. But let's just choose the one for PSConfEU. And this is the first place where we can actually go ahead and add our own customization. So we're coming back to talk about customizations on multiple levels, but this is first and foremost customizations for me as an individual user with my personal preferences for things like I like to use all my push, for example, in the terminal, all of these personal preferences that we don't necessarily want to predict or set for the whole team. So when I check this box, click continue, you can see that I can choose either to point to a repository or I can simply upload a YAML file. We're going to look more into these YAML files and what options are available later on, but for now let's just kick off our deployment here, because as you can see, initial creation can take from 25 minutes depending on how much customizations you have in the image. Let's go ahead and validate this. So it will basically parse the YAML file, make sure that you are using a supported schema and that you have a valid syntax, right? So when this validation task has completed, we can go ahead and click continue and come back to this DevBox later on. But I have, as you can see, a couple of DevBoxes already provisioned that we'll use for the demos here, so we don't have to wait. There are also other ways to provision, so we don't have to use the portal. Typically have to use it only for the first deployment, but you can also use the CLI. There is a Azure CLI extension available for DevBox, and there is also a possibility to use the DevBox MCP server. There was a lot of talk about MCP, right, in the keynote yesterday, and that is something that we'll also explore. So let's just cook in the oven for a while and go back and have a look at the other things here. So the web portal was the one that we use now. We also have something called the Windows app. So that is also installed on my device. And the Windows app, it's also available on Mac OS. So if you're a Mac user at home, for example, I have a Mac that I use when working remotely. Then I have the Windows app and I can remote into this DevBox to do whatever I need to do. Or you can also go ahead here and click on these dots and add it to the task view. That was what I had done on my local machine, right? Made it possible to easily transition between the local machine and the remote DevBox. So simply go ahead and click connect here and you'll get either a full window like I do now to transition back and forth, or you can get them in this traditional RDP windows, as you can see here. So when I'm inside a DevBox, it's a full-blown Windows experience, Windows 11 typically, but you can also decide what image to use if you want to use some of the others. For this one, I used the predefined image that we have for Windows 11 with Visual Studio installed and some other things that is kind of used for this demo environment. Another opportunity I also wanted to take is to showcase the new preview that was announced at Ignite, at Build back in May, and that is the ability to use VS Code to remotely connect to your DevBox. So you don't have to go into the full RDP experience, you can simply just use VS Code. So first of all, you need to go into the extensions view and search for DevBox and make sure that you have the DevBox extension installed. That will also make it much easier to do things like auto customizations that we are going to talk about afterwards. And it can also give you a lot of help with the agent integration, right? So you can simply point to your existing repo code base and ask Copilot to create a suggestion for an image definition based on the code base. So this extension can really provide a lot of value to get you started without having to write everything from scratch. And as you can see, there is also a lot of tasks available in VS Code when you install this extension. But what I'm going to showcase now is the remote tunnel feature. So after we have installed the extension, let's go to the DevBox icon here. So here it will show the DevBox projects that I have available. It will show all of my active DevBoxes, so you can already see that it's creating, right, the one that we just started provisioning in the portal. But if I select one of them, for example, this one, here you have the option to enable tunnel, and this is the new feature that I mentioned that is currently in preview. So by default, this tunnel is not enabled, so I have enabled it beforehand, so we don't need to wait for that. This will authenticate using Entra so that you can connect in a secure fashion to the remote machine. And when you have it enabled, you can select connect to DevBox here. And here it will say, are you sure you want to connect to the tunnel? This will open a new VS Code window. Then we'll go ahead and click connect. And then you can notice in the bottom left, it says opening remote. And here you can see that it's connecting to the VS Code server running on the DevBox. So that means I'm now connected to the DevBox from my local VS Code instance. And if I click, for example, open folder here, that will be the local file system on the DevBox, right? So for example, if you are a Mac user and you might prefer the shortcuts that is on use with VS Code from your local environment, then you can simply connect to the DevBox using this method. But this will of course depend on the project you are working with. If you need the full Visual Studio experience, for example, then you obviously need to connect into the machine, but this is a great possibility, at least for me personally, which works a lot with infrastructure as code and PowerShell. This is sufficient to be able to use that remote machine as my development environment. And then it's also easy to connect from other machines, right? So if I have a separate machine at home, I have my work laptop and so forth, I can just connect to that same environment. So let's just close that one, and we can go back to the next topic. So now we talked a bit about the DevBox basics and kind of how does it look like for the end user. Can also have a quick look at the MCP server, right? So if you click on the GitHub Copilot icon, you can see, I can try to zoom in a little bit here. On the top here, I have run some commands in the past using the MCP server integration. So now I have GitHub Copilot in agent mode. If you look at the tools available here, you can see that for DevBox, we have the DevBox MCP server, right? That provides all of these tasks, meaning that the MCP server, or GitHub Copilot in this case, can actually do things. So you can notice that it says create a DevBox. So I could simply go ahead and create a DevBox for this project, type it into the chat, and it can actually do it for us. And this is also really powerful when it comes to creating the definitions and so forth, right? Because it can get access to what the customization tasks is already available and so forth. So here you can see an example of me just saying list my DevBoxes. Then it will of course prompt you by default. Can I run list all DevBoxes, for example? So you can say accept. You can say accept for this session or accept always. Then it listed the 2 DevBoxes that I had available. And next I simply said start this DevBox, and it went ahead and actually did it for me. So I can use this experience and never touch the portal if I don't want to. In the extras section that you see here, there are also some information about using the CLI if you rather prefer to use AC DevBox create, for example, to create the DevBoxes from the command line or start and stop them and so forth. Let's exit out of that one and have a look at the next topic, which is looking at how we can customize these DevBoxes using configuration as code. So I suppose most people here are familiar with what's been available for 12 years, I think. The PowerShell desired state has been available since PowerShell 4, which was released in 2013. So this is kind of the good old DSC that we all are probably familiar with. So if you scroll down and have a look at where we are today, right? Microsoft desired state configuration 3.0 was generally available back in March, I believe. The latest version, which is 3.1, that was actually GA'd last week. So it's, as you can see, actively being developed. And there are a lot of differences, fundamental differences between Windows PowerShell or PowerShell desired state configuration and Microsoft state configuration, because this is agnostic to operating systems. It has a different language, JSON or YAML files, as we're going to have a look at soon. So if you compare this to the experience we have in DevBox today, it's actually building upon the previous versions here. But PowerShell or the DSC 3 is now also supported in the latest Winget release. So it's available in preview today. I believe the goal is to GA the new release with official support for 3 today, isn't it, Dimitris? Yeah. So Dimitris is the program manager for Winget. So let's have a look at the DSC core principles, right? That applies to all of the versions, basically. The concept that it's declarative, you just describe, in this case, the DevBox environment. How do we want it to look like? What packages should be installed? What Git repositories should be pre-cloned when I provision the environment, and so forth. We don't say anything about how, we just specify in a declarative manner how we want to do it. So the same concepts that you are familiar with from DSC is still applicable. So in the context of DSC, there are different scenarios, right? So traditionally, we have been working with DSC for IT platforms, IT teams that are doing operations to do configuration management on servers. But in this case, we are actually looking at the development team scenario where we want to standardize the development environment setup and get it automated based on configuration as code. And that's where Winget comes into the picture to do a lot of the things that we have in the environment. So DSC is the foundation for the package management side of things. We leverage the Winget package manager, but Winget it serves 2 purposes. One of them is the package management, and the other one is the orchestration of parsing and applying DSC configurations. So Microsoft DevBox uses DSC through Winget configuration. So Winget is a key part together with the DSC in how all of this works. So next we're going to have a look at a demo of DSC v3 and Winget configuration. We're going to have a look at a couple of different scenarios. One of them is the export capability, that you can imagine that you're a team lead for a project, right, or a team of developers. You want to create a configuration for what prerequisites, what tools should be installed on that machine. Then you typically can set up a reference machine, configure everything as you want, and do the export command that we are going to have a look at it in the demo, and use that as a base instead of starting with a fresh configuration file. So let's have a look at that demo. Then we're going into another DevBox, the DSC v3 DevBox. First of all, this is running on 1.11, the version that is going to be GA today on June the 24th, if things goes according to plans. First, before we run the commands, let's have a look at how the configurations look like, because we can use Winget configure and apply it manually if we want to test and so forth. But let's have a look at, first of all, the DSC v3 demo YAML file. And here you can see on the top we have some metadata that says that it's going to use DSC v3 as the processor, right? Because as I said, it will use the previous versions of DSC by default, but here you can create configuration documents saying that it should use the latest version. And then you define resources as we are used to when working with DSC. It's just that it's a different format. So instead of defining it in PowerShell, we use YAML in this case. Specify what type of resource is it, and the individual properties for the different things we want to configure. So in this case, we want the system color mode to be dark as an example. We want the taskbar alignment, instead of being in the middle like it's by default on Windows 11, we want to place it on the left-hand side. That could be a preference for someone. Same thing, we are going to configure the desktop background using a DSC configuration, so pointing to the PSConfEU logo in this example, and so forth. We're doing customizations, installing packages, and this could be a long document, right, for a project to kind of include all of the things that is needed, clone the repository, and all of the other prerequisites. But instead of applying it using this way, as I mentioned, in Winget, we actually have a file handler in Windows. So if you rename the file to .winget instead of .yaml, like we can see here, it's the same content, but that makes it possible to just double-click on the file in the file system. So if we go back into the VM, maximize it, and we go to the desktop, here you can see that I have the two demo files available. I'll just call them .winget instead of .yaml. You can see that we have the color mode set to light. We can see that we have the alignment for the taskbar is in the middle. So let's just go ahead and double click here. Then you can see that it will automatically run Winget with pointing to that configuration file. This takes a few seconds to run, but after it has parsed the configuration, it's going to preview what is going to happen, all of the things that I had defined in the configuration file. Then we will get a very important stage where we get asked, do we really want to apply this? Because now this is running in the context of our user, and it can do basically anything that we can do on the system. So it will ask us to confirm that we take full responsibility, that we know the content of the configuration file, and that we really want to apply this. So this is an important aspect in when applying this. Then it's going to pass through each resource and do the usual things in DSC, right? It's going to do the test, see if it's in the desired state, and if not, it's going to apply it. So we'll soon see that it's going to move the taskbar, it's going to change the color mode into dark, and you will eventually see that the background is going to change to the PSConfEU logo here. The next thing I wanted to showcase is the export functionality. So, as I said, configure everything as we want, all of the settings that we have available. Then run this export command that we have available here. So Winget configure export. Here you can go ahead and point to individual resources, or you can just say --all to state that you want to export everything. So let's go ahead and open a new window and kick this off. It takes some time to go through everything, so I have a pre-run export available, so we can have a look on how the end result looks like. Let's go into this one. And there you can also see that it has created the metadata for DSC v3. It have detected all of the different settings for color mode and everything, and at the bottom here you can see that there is a lot of packages that it has passed through and detected on my system. So then I have a reference that I can pick and choose, remove the stuff that is not relevant and so forth, and really have a good starting point for creating a new configuration. Yeah, so this is just our prediction on how things might look like in the future. So currently, the code that the resources that we was looking at was from the Winget DSC samples folder in the Winget DSC repository, which is used more for incubation samples and so forth. But the vision here is to more have a comprehensive resource for Windows setting management. So that, for example, the Windows team can generate DSC resources for all of the settings that are available to configure in Windows. It can be registry keys, it can be a lot of different ways that those are configured, so that the team owning the settings can provide the resources. That's kind of the goal here. And if that happens at some point in time, then we can probably have DSC resources that looks something like this, but some of them are already available for testing, right, based on what's available in the sample repository. So there is a link here for those of you who would like to test that out already. This is just more information about the export configuration and also the syntax for doing it using DSC natively instead of using Winget for those who are interested in those details. So this will be included in the content I'll share in the conference repository later on. So here is an example of how we can use this capability to define what is called a team customization file in DevBox to define the standard settings for a project. So it makes it much more easier, right, to adhere to all of these various things like enterprise governance, because when you set up a DevBox, you can choose to enroll it into both Intune and Intra or one of them to comply with the security inside of the environment, right? So that Intune can manage update management lifecycle and all of those things, so that the responsibilities for the platform team is adhered to, and the security and the compliance and those elements, but also that the development team have a standardized setup, so it's consistent, and try to avoid more that it works on my machine, right? It's a consistent setup with identical settings, identical software installed. Winget we already talked about, right? That it's the package manager is one of the features, so you can use Winget CLI to install and search for packages. We also have a PowerShell module available on the gallery, so we can use find Winget package, for example, instead of Winget search. So all of the things in this notebook I have already covered as part of the session so far. So let's go over to the next, scroll down a little bit and see if there was anything that I missed. Yeah, this is also good to mention that there are new capabilities in DSC 3 that we don't have in the previous versions, like, for example, assertions that you can say operating system version needs to be at least Windows 11, for example. So if the assertion fails, it simply will skip the settings that are only relevant for that. And there are also other things that are new in V3, like groups for running things in parallel, and a lot of DSC specific elements in there. So if you're interested in kind of introduction to DSC, we of course have the product documentation, but I would also recommend a book that is called the DSC Handbook, DSC V3 Handbook, that I'll provide a link to in the resources afterwards. It goes through a lot of this get how to set up the authoring environment, what extensions is useful in VS Code, how to get syntax highlighting and IntelliSense and all those kind of things is covered in the book. So the key takeaway from this part is that DSC 3 is a platform. It's not a complete solution, but it's a foundation for others to build upon, right? So DevBox is building upon it, Azure Machine Configuration is building upon it, and so forth. There are a lot of sample resources available in the official repository for DSC that you can have a look at, or for Winget configuration that you can have a look at. So this I've used a lot of them in these examples, but we are also using it in the Arc Jumpstart. As I mentioned, I'm a core maintainer on that team, so there we have also adopted Winget configuration for doing a lot of the setups. So if you look into this examples folder and Arc Jumpstart, there we have YAML files for doing basically all of the package installations on ArcBox, for example, localbox, all of the Jumpstart specific elements. So in this case, we have one for installing the packages. We have one for doing other things that we can do with DSC. For example, we already have the native DSC resources for installing server features. So in that case, we are using Hyper-V. And we also have Hyper-V specific resources, right, in the DSC community that the community have created for configuring, for example, in this example, Hyper-V specific things, creating a switch, creating virtual machines, and so forth. So here's another example where we are provisioning virtual machines in Hyper-V using Winget configuration. So there are also a lot of use cases for using it in those kind of scenarios. Final part, or next to final part, is on the DevBox itself, the team customizations feature. So let's scroll down and talk a little bit about the levels that you can configure customizations on, because you noticed in the first demo where I created a new DevBox, right? And I clicked new and I could upload my individual customization. That's an user customization where I can upload a YAML file that I have created for my preferences. But for the team customizations, the file have to be named in this naming convention, and it have to be sourced from a catalog. And a catalog, it's basically a reference to a repository in either Azure DevOps or in GitHub that have this image definition YAML file defined in it. So I'll show in the portal soon how this looks like in practice. So when you create these image definitions for installing the different things, there are predefined tasks available. So if you go in VS Code, open the command palette and run DevBox, you can click for example, on list available tasks for this DevBox and get an overview over the tasks that are available. So we have built-in ones that are for Winget, for running arbitrary PowerShell script, for example, to easily copy the syntax, insert it into the current file, and so forth. But you can also go ahead and create your own custom tasks, right? And these can also be hosted in a repository which is referenced as a catalog in the context of DevBox. And these tasks, they can run in various contexts, right? So if you have the team customizations, some of them can run in the system context, right? If it's just installing some software, but some of them might be need to run in user context, like the other example where I configured the desktop background that needs to run in the user context, right? So those things will run after logon. So the first time the user log on to the DevBox, the DevBox agent is going to apply the settings that the user have uploaded in that YAML file and run it in the context of the user. So let's also have a quick peek in the portal, how it looks like from an infrastructure perspective. So as I mentioned, this is an Azure service, so you can go ahead in the portal and search for DevBox, navigate to Microsoft DevBox. Here we have the concept of dev centers, and you can think of dev center as a higher level organization, similar to what you have in GitHub and Azure DevOps, right? You have the organization level on top, and then you have the projects or repositories underneath. So typically we would need at least one dev center for your organization. You can, of course, have multiple depending on how the organization is structured. In my case, I have one, and under projects, this is where you can create projects for the individual teams, the individual projects that you have in the organization. And all of this also ties into permissions with the Azure role-based access control, right? So that you can delegate access to, for example, team leads to be able to create these DevBox definitions. And there is a separate role called DevBox user that you can grant to the developers that are going to consume or be able to create DevBoxes. We also have the opportunity to integrate with the virtual networks in Azure, and by default, you can choose to use a Microsoft managed network that provides internet access, but typically you also would like to integrate for the developer if they are targeting some Azure service that they are developing, for example, logic apps, functions apps, and so forth, things that are constrained behind private endpoints and not exposed externally. Then you would typically deploy the DevBox inside of an Azure VNet that have network level access to those resources, right? So that the developer can do secure connectivity via a private path to the resources in order to test in test and QA environments, typically to develop the service or the feature that they are working on. And then we have the DevBox tools, the backend for what we saw earlier on. You can see I'm using a mix of VNet integrated and unmanaged networks, but let's go into the project for PSConfEU and also a quick look at the DevBox settings that we have for a project. So here you can choose if you want it to be possible to have these user customizations, right? So in this case, I have enabled it. When it comes to cost, you can choose how many DevBoxes you want to allow per developer, automatically delete unused DevBoxes using settings that you specify here. But we also have this notion of hibernation, right, that we have enabled so that if a user is not using their DevBox for a certain amount of time, like 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, it will automatically save the state of the machine. So it's not like in a regular Azure VM where you turn it off and you lose everything that you have open, right? It will simply just pause the machine or hibernate the memory and everything so that you can save the compute costs. So if you compare the pricing to running a regular virtual machine in Azure, the cost here is much lower because the only permanent cost is the storage for the virtual machine. In my case, I have set up with 256 gigabyte of memory. That doesn't cost much per month. And in the compute cost, it's per hour, right, for what the developer are using. So the costs are much lower than when comparing it to regular Azure VMs. Also have a quick look at the catalog. So here is the connection to the repository where you have hosted your files, right? So go ahead and add your sources here. You can use managed identities to authenticate or fetch personal access token from a key vault if needed. And this will synchronize and parse the YAML files that the team have defined for their image definition.yaml file. That's it for the kind of infrastructure setup. Let's have a look further down how it yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention here is if you choose to have a lot of customizations, install a lot of applications, that can take a long time, right, to install. Can take maybe an hour, 1.5 hours to install everything if you have a large file with a lot of things. So then you can choose to, instead of consuming the marketplace images directly, you can either bring your own image or use a marketplace image as a base, but you can pre-build with all of the customizations due to the integration here we have with the Azure Compute Gallery, so that you can go basically in the portal and click, can show it quickly here. If you go to an image definition, you can see here that we have the option to click the build button here to refresh the image based on the latest customizations. So then it will be much faster to do the initial provisioning because everything will be in the image and the personal customizations will come on top of that, right? Just a reference to the various permissions that is available. DevBox user, as I said, for using the developer portal and so forth. Yeah, so as I said, Microsoft DevBox has been generally available for 2 years, but the DevBox customization feature that was actually generally available last month at Microsoft Build, so that you can go ahead and use in production today. also wanted to quickly mention before we close out a service that goes hand in hand with DevBox, and that is something called Azure Deployment Environments. That makes it possible for developers to also have self-service for creating environments, right? Because a project, typically, if you're using Azure, that is, then you of course have to provision test environments for functions, logic apps, Cosmos DB, whatever service the project is using. So what this feature makes possible is for a platform team or maybe the team lead on the project to create the infrastructure as code templates, Bicep, Terraform, for example, to provision the resources needed for the project. And then the developers can get self-service capabilities, right, to provision the resources. So you might have noticed in the initial demo that when I went into the developer portal, we had another option here called New Environment. So here you can basically select from a predefined set of definitions. These definitions are from a sample repository, but this could be definitions that was created by the team lead or the team together, right, with the relevant services for their specific application. So in this case, let's just select container app, for example, as an example, give it some random name. Can also enable schedule deletion if I just need this for a day just to test some new feature as an example. And all of the parameters that is exposed here, those are mapped to the parameters in the Bicep file or in the Terraform configuration, right? So that the developer really gets a kind of very user-friendly front end and don't have to learn the nitty-gritty details of infrastructure as code in order to deploy things. So just quickly show how the container app, for example, works. The one that we just deployed is just a regular main.bicep file with some parameters. And the only thing you need to add on top of that is this environment.yaml file to basically map the parameters that are exposed in the portal that we just saw into the relevant parameters inside of the Bicep file. So let's close this one, and we can see on the bottom here, you see under environments, the environments that you have as a developer provisioned, and if you click on view resources, you will get taken directly into the Azure portal to your specific resource group that was deployed by the Azure Deployment Services service. And here the platform team or the team lead can decide what permission the developer gets here. So in my case, I configure it with contributor so that they have the full capabilities to use this test environment to do whatever development testing they need to, and they don't have the restrictions of anything basically. And when you have created the feature you want to do, then you can create a pull request and get it into the next stage, which could be a QA environment or a dev environment as an example. So basically self-service capabilities for infrastructure as code is kind of Azure deployment environments in a nutshell. This would be a whole session alone to go into the details, but I just wanted to showcase that it goes hand in hand with the DevBox, right, to use infrastructure as code in the context of developers. Perfect partners, as we said there. So let's try to wrap things up. We have went through the DevBox basics, right, and had a look at the different access methods that we have. We had a look at the VS Code Dev Tunnels feature and had a quick peek at the DevBox MCP server that was also announced at Ignite. Talked a little bit about PowerShell desired state and Winget configuration, how that comes in the picture when it comes to how the DevBox service uses team customizations and user customizations. So this kind of shows the full picture that in the configuration as code ecosystem that we have the orchestration layer on top with the DevBox and Winget configuration together, the package management layer and the supporting services underneath with the DSC, as I mentioned, which is a platform, and all of the supporting infrastructure like the compute gallery in Azure for building images and so forth, eventually resulting in a development team having a consistent environment, rapid onboarding with all of the security and compliance already in place because it's being automatically enrolled in Intune and so forth. So I'm going to share all of these notebooks and scripts in the repository, so it's easy to test yourself if you're interested in getting hands-on with this. And I'll also wrap things up with the next step. So here we have some tips for resources, right? So aka.ms/devbox to get to the getting started page, and also the config as code is a blog article with everything you need to get started. We also have some related sessions that have already been today or yesterday with Dimitri's session that is possible to watch the recording of on YouTube. Same thing with the session about Intune remediation scripts inside of Intune. So with that, I think we're on time. Any questions, feel free to grab me in the, and also of course the DSC handbook that I mentioned by Heis. Really recommend you to check that out. If you have any questions, feel free to come up afterwards or grab me in the hallways or during the community dinner, and we can have a closer conversation about DevBox. So with that, thank you very much.